So again, we say good morning and welcome to the second public comment meeting for the Citywide ADA self-evaluation update for the FY22, FY27 action plan. Today is Tuesday, July 20th, and we're glad you could join us here today. As you'll notice, my screen is off so that we can have the spotlight on our American Sign Language interpreter. I'm going to keep my screen, my video, and all other speakers' videos will remain off while we are conducting the PowerPoint presentation. We're going to slide 2. So again, this meeting is being recorded and may be broadcast on CMAC Public Television. As the presenter, I'll keep my camera off during the PowerPoint so we can spotlight our interpreter. My name is Shannon Mulhall, and I am the Americans with Disabilities Act Coordinator. And I'll be talking through our ADA action plan today. We are asking that members of the public, you're welcome to put your comments and questions in the chat box throughout. However, we'd like to address any comments or questions at the end of the presentation, and there'll be time for that. Attendees to this public meeting are not able to show video or speak until called upon. And we'll talk more about how to be called on during the public comment period. All right, slide 3. So our ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act Self-Evaluation Action Plan, can be found online. And we've created a short link for you. It's www.fresno.gov/ADA plan. And at that website, you'll also find our input survey. I'm not going to read out the longer link that's posted here, but you can find a link to provide input at the fresno.gov/ADA plan location. You can also provide feedback by contacting me directly via email or phone number. My email is shannon.mulhall@fresno.gov. And my direct phone number is 559-621-8716. We value your feedback and we hope you take an opportunity to download the ADA Self-Evaluation Action Plan and provide a comment about what you'd like to see or what you appreciate within that document. All right, slide 4. So a self-evaluation is a requirement under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, as well as a requirement of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And so as part of the self-evaluation, we at the City of Fresno must identify and evaluate all of our programs, activities, and services, and take time to review our policies and practices and procedures. The reason here is really to look at how can we remove barriers to access, and how over the next 5 years in this action plan are we going to take systematic steps to make our programs more inclusive and more accessible. And so that's what we'll be talking about today. Slide 5. So one of the things I want to talk about first is the difference between program access and physical access. This plan primarily looks at program access, but there are elements of physical access. So I want to take some time on this. So program access really can be a wide range of ways of making our program services and activities equitable. It could mean structural changes, like making alterations to an existing facility, but many times it can be non-structural kinds of activities, things like acquiring or redesigning equipment, assigning aids and services, such as providing a sign language interpreter. It could also mean providing services at alternate accessible locations. Some other non-structural kind of ways to help with program access also include training and education of employees in how to interact with members of the public. Now, physical access, again, looks at more of the structural elements of accessibility, and those items that have a need to be corrected, those barriers to access that are physical in nature, are actually addressed in our ADA transition plans. And we are not going to be talking about the physical access, the structural elements very much today. We're really looking at more of the program access with a nod to some of those structural things that do create barriers to access. But again, most of those structural or physical access elements are going to be found in the ADA transition plan. And of course, for the city of Fresno, whenever we choose a method for providing program access, we want it to be the one that's the most integrated. We know that the Americans with Disabilities Act is a civil rights law, and we want to make sure that civil rights are maintained in a way that's the most integrated possible and most integrated setting appropriate. Slide 6. So why an ADA action plan? Well, this is an ongoing process. The last time that we conducted an ADA access plan was about 5 years ago. I'm sorry, ADA action plan was about 5 years ago. And the good news is most of the city departments have accomplished those goals that they set out to accomplish, have removed those barriers that were identified in the last self-evaluation update. And so this is something that the city is committed to continue to do on a 5-year basis to identify those areas of improvement and ways that we can make our programs more accessible. And so what the action plan does is it identifies and corrects any policies or practices that are inconsistent with the requirements of ADA. And it also develops policy practice recommendations for each and every department, division, and section. So this is an important thing, and we want to make sure that that's covered for the community. We're going to move on to slide 7. So in general, there are some general compliance elements that we need to acknowledge. The city of Fresno is required to have an ADA notice, a grievance procedure, and an ADA coordinator. We have all 3 of those. And you can find a copy of the ADA notice and the ADA grievance procedure by going online to www.fresno.gov/ADA. Now, each of our offices also has access to print versions and poster versions of our notice and our grievance. So those should be readily available within any public area of our city facilities. And ADA coordinator, I am the designated ADA coordinator for the city of Fresno. And working with me are representatives from each and every department, which we refer to as ADA liaisons. And I want to take a moment here to pause and give a big nod of thanks to our ADA liaisons. Many of them are on this public comment call, ready to answer your questions. But these folks have really looked thoughtfully and carefully at their department needs and the needs of the members of the public engaging with their department. And have put some dedicated effort into the steps that we'll outline today. So thank you, ADA liaisons, for continuing to be champions. Slide 8. So a little bit of background on the city of Fresno's compliance. And this is an overview of our self-evaluations and our transition plans. So the city has conducted self-evaluations in 1994, in 2002, and 2017. And now again, throughout 2020 and 21, this update self-evaluation, which is resulting in the action plan we're talking about today. The city did a physical inventory of all curb ramps all curb returns that required an installation of curb ramps in 2002 and again in 2007. We did a physical inventory of sidewalks in 2004 and again in 2007. And physical audits of multiple city facilities from 2006 to 2009, as well as a physical inventory of bus stops that started in 2016. And all of these physical inventories feed into the transition plans that the city has adopted or is currently in the process of adopting. So our transition plan for the right-of-way was first adopted in 2003. It was updated in 2016. And as one of the action plan steps for Public Works Department, which you'll see today, is tentatively looking to update that right-of-way transition plan in fiscal year 25. Now, facilities transition plan was adopted by council in 2017, and we create an annual addenda each year. Each year there's a new addendum that outlines what projects have been completed, what projects are budgeted for the next year, and projects that we're looking forward to in the future years. And so that's one way that we keep our facilities transition plan fairly current. And the transportation department is also has a transition plan that is currently soon to go before council for approval. And that outlines how we're going to systematically over time improve access to our bus stops throughout the city of Fresno. Slide 9. The city of Fresno has a Disability Advisory Commission, which is comprised of 7 community leaders appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council. Now, 5 of the 7 members must be persons with disabilities. And I will tell you, I love working with these folks. I'm going to go a little bit on the side here and just applaud each and every one of these community leaders, because they help to guide us on decision making and really looking at what's going to work for folks with disabilities in our community. So let me read off our Disability Advisory Commission members who are appointed by the mayor and approved by council. We have Chair Francis Reyes Acosta, our Vice Chair, Susan Coulter, Mary Beth Randall, Ken Elvington, Jonas Paulus, and Dr. Janelle Pitt. We currently have 1 vacancy on our Disability Advisory Commission that must be filled with a person who has a disability. The City of Fresno Disability Advisory Commission maintains 2 subcommittees that focus in on the areas of transportation and housing. So these are very, very valuable commissions, and we appreciate each and every one of those individuals who also volunteer their time and energy to improve the way that we do the things we do. The Disability Advisory Commission did assist the city in gaining perspective and setting some priorities for this action plan through their monthly discussions and engagement. And we look forward to continuing to collaborate with our advisory commission. And pictured here on the screen, as you may have well understood, throughout 2020, our Disability Advisory Commission met via Zoom. So we weren't able to take a formal photo, but below that is a photo from 2019 with our mayor and then city manager during our Disability Awareness Month. I do want to take a quick pause here to note that our Disability Advisory Commission does do an annual awards, and currently we are in the nomination period. If you know anyone in the community who should be nominated for an achievement award for their inclusive actions, please nominate them. Slide 10. One of the things that you'll see throughout our ADA action plan is that each and every department has a list of practices that facilitate inclusion. And really this shows what have they been doing all these years? What are our departments already doing? What are the best practices that we're going to maintain? And I really wish that I could talk about each and every one of our departments, because they are doing a lot of really good work already. But we won't have time during this hour to go through all of those promising practices. I do encourage you to read through the action plan and take a look at what each department is already doing, the practices that facilitate inclusion. But I am going to give you some overview for citywide practices that do facilitate inclusion. So in general, our staff has an awareness of the need to provide modifications and accommodations, that things need to be accessible for members of the community. The City of Fresno has a robust ADA training program. All new employees receive a half-hour training, and then all employees must get an hour-long training on ADA every 2 years. There's an additional training for supervisors related to modifications and accommodations. And the city offers accessible document training, how to prepare documents in a way that's accessible for everyone. I will note that from 2013 to 2020, we had over 180 employees that were trained in the accessible documents. So we're making a conscious commitment to improve our digital accessibility. Citywide employees are aware that service animals shall be welcomed and are trained on how to conduct limited inquiry to people with disabilities who are entering city facilities with service animals. We have an effective communication policy, as well as several policies related to digital accessibility or information and communication technology. So that's just a quick look at some of the citywide practices. This isn't all of them. I encourage you again to take a look at the action plan and see some of the steps that are already in place, some of the actions that are already taking place with each and every department to facilitate inclusion. Slide 11. So in our plan, we also have several citywide action steps. These are steps that every single department has committed to. And you'll notice that in each department, those are items A and B in those departments that have this element. So the first action step that every single department is taking is to designate individuals who are responsible for document accessibility. Those individuals will conduct training and ensure that their department documents that are posted online or distributed to the public are accessible. And then item B is training on how to have accessible social media posts. This is something that, the ADA didn't think about, but we are definitely thinking about it now as we're in a world where we do a lot of engagement online and social media. And so that's an objective that you'll see in all of the departments that maintain social media accounts. So as I go through department to department talking about the steps, you may see that it skips straight to B or straight to C, and that's intentional because each department has one or both of these steps. Slide 12. So let's talk about some of the action steps that the airports department would like to take to help remove barriers to access. The first is they're working on a mobile application that provides step-by-step visual guidance for navigating the airport. And this is called Magnus Mode. And they've identified that this is a mobile application that can be useful for a variety of folks with disabilities so that navigating through the airport is a little bit easier. Their target completion for that is fiscal year 23. The airports division is also actively working on a terminal expansion, and two really exciting elements that are going to be included in that expansion is an updated service animal relief area, also known as a SARA, S-A-R-A, service animal relief area, as well as an adult changing facility. So this is something that the community itself has actually advocated for, saying that, there are needs for adults with disabilities within the community for better facilities that will assist for the assistance of bathrooming functions. And so the airports is going to be including that in the terminal expansion. And the goal for that is to be completed by fiscal year 24. These next two goals I'll talk about concurrently. We do have individuals in the airport's capital maintenance division, capital projects division that will be going through certified access specialist training. And this is a California credential on state and federal accessibility regulations. And so we do have a goal of fiscal year 22 and ongoing for the certified access specialist training. And in the meantime, we'll also have a goal to work with a certified access specialist or CASP contractor for plan review and inspection as needed. These are both fiscal year 22 and ongoing goals. I do want to take a quick nod to the image on the screen. This is from one of the airport's best practices. They have partnered for many years with the ARC Fresno Madera County to provide travel training for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, including autism spectrum disorder. It's a program called Wings for Autism, and it couldn't be done without partnership from the community. Slide 13. Now let's talk about the City Attorney's Office. The City Attorney's Office, not only does it house our legal attorneys, it also houses our code enforcement and community revitalization divisions. So for our City Attorney's Office, they are looking towards having 1 or 2 attorneys pursue ADA Coordinator certification and or CASP credentials. And that's partly to increase their support of all of the divisions. The goals there are FY23 and 26 respectively. City Attorney's Office this is one of those physical barriers that we're removing. They are going to be modifying their front counter or service desk to be an accessible counter, and the target completion is fiscal year 22. For our code enforcement or community revitalization officers that have a lot of contact with members of the public, the City Attorney's Office is looking into developing pictograph cards for communication access. So as they're working with members of the public who may have speech or hearing or language disabilities, or even those that may have language differences, the pictograph card can assist with better communication out in the field. And lastly, the City Attorney's Office has committed to, in the fiscal year 22 and ongoing every couple of years, to have really specific disability etiquette training for those inspectors that are going out and working with members of the public. They said, yes, we know we do the 1-hour training, but we also believe that those folks that are doing these kind of customer service heavy type jobs where there's a lot of public engagement should have a little more increased knowledge on disability etiquette and sensitivity, and they've committed to working with a local disability organization to provide that training. Slide 14. Now we're going to talk about the City Clerk's office. The City Clerk is taking the lead on coordinating permanent part-time interpreters for public meetings, including but not limited to city council meetings. And this is a goal that goes actually beyond the ADA and also touches on some Title VI, but I did want to make a nod to that as well, that they are looking to hire 2 American Sign Language interpreters as well as some spoken language interpreters to increase public access to information. In addition to that goal, updates will be made to AO 8-18, which is our administrative order related to effective communication, because we want to include procedures for requesting interpreters. The goal for that is fiscal year 22 and ongoing. Slide 15, our finance department. Our finance department is making a commitment to reorganize their web pages, replacing existing documents with accessible versions, and really taking a look at how usable and easy is it to navigate through and find the information you need within their web pages. The goal for that is completed by fiscal year 22. Our finance department also oversees our utility billing and collection, which is where folks go to pay their utility bills. And as part of that, they're going to be developing a guided support center, which would be a computer in the lobby with dedicated staff to assist folks who may struggle with setting up online accounts or using online bill pay and may need a little bit more assistance. And finance has committed to working with our web accessibility coordinator to make sure that the equipment they use, the technology there, is the most usable for all members of the public. And the goal for that is fiscal year 22 and ongoing thereafter. The next goal is related to utility billing and collection. Again, currently there's a phone payment system that's not fully accessible for all individuals who need additional time to input selections. And finance, being aware of that, has created kind of a two-tier process for addressing that issue. So the new payment software is in the process of procurement, but we don't believe that that'll be set up until fiscal year 24. That's the goal for that replacement. So in the interim, starting this fiscal year, staff with the appropriate authority will be assigned to assist with phone payments to support the phone payment method. We really want to make sure that this is as equitable as possible, as we acknowledge that it does need to be replaced. So this is a two-tier goal, fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 24. And lastly, for the finance department, this is actually a pretty big goal right here. It's additional support to our information services department for our procurement and contracts for information and communication technology. So we do have policies related to ensuring that technology procured is accessible, but we do need to improve how we actually enforce that policy and meet that policy. And so Finance's procurement division is going to be working more closely with ISD and ensuring that that happens. That's fiscal year 22 and an ongoing basis. All right, slide 16, let's talk about the fire department. First, I want to make a nod to the photo here. This is a group of folks a couple years ago from Vocations Plus Connections, Inc. And they provide services for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And they have been a tremendous partner with the city of Fresno for both law enforcement efforts as well as emergency response effort. So pictured on the screen is this group with several of our Fresno firefighters in front of a I'm going to say fire engine. I think I'm getting that right. It's not a fire truck, it's an engine. And these folks actually volunteered to pretend to be victims during an exercise. It was a multi-jurisdictional exercise that our department was going through, and it really was an asset for our folks to have that hands-on practice working with this community. So big thank you to those volunteers for helping us out. So let's talk about the fire department action steps. So in addition to our documents and social media training, they have an action step to provide optional training for staff on basic sign and effective communication with people who are deaf or hard of hearing. So they really recognize that they have a lot of public contact, and communication is important during disasters and other critical incidents, or even your everyday house disaster. So they're also going to be seeking out communication access tools that can go on the apparatus or the engines and trucks. And the goal there is fiscal year 25. Now, the next goal is also a pictograph card, very similar to what I mentioned for city attorney's office, but this will be kind of geared towards our fire department needs. And the goal for that pictograph card is FY 22, fiscal year 22. Slide 17. Let's talk about Information Services Department, ISD. So as I mentioned before, we do have administrative orders related to accessible digital content. That's Administrative Order 8-20. However, we've acknowledged that the process and requirements are still inconsistently applied. So this is where ISD and Finance are going to be working together to tighten things up as our departments are going through the RFP and RFQ process, making sure that they are engaging with our web accessibility coordinator. So this goal again is FY 22 and ongoing, making sure that contract templates are inclusive of those requirements. The second goal here is tracking and progress software to keep digital records of our compliance and schedule notifications for those vendors that provide digital technology, making sure that we're keeping those vendors up to date on what we need as far as accessibility is concerned. And that we're tracking when are those going to be renewed. And that's fiscal year 23. Another goal is related to the ongoing dialogue with existing contractors regarding the information and communication technology. And again, those many times we work with a vendor over a series of years, and they may not be aware or as aware of the needs for digital accessibility. So that's what this goal is about. And that's for fiscal year 24. The next goal on here is to compile a list of all city-owned websites. I know you thought Fresno.gov was the only city website, but it turns out the city of Fresno has a variety of other kind of special one-off type websites. So what we'll be doing is compiling those, reviewing them for accessibility, and those web pages that have access issues will either be closed or fixed. Here it says remediated, but really it's fixing any accessibility errors that are online. And the goal for that is fiscal year 24. Slide 18, we're continuing on with Information Services Department. They're also working actively right now on developing an ICT, Information Communication Technology, toolkit for employees who are working on document accessibility. So this includes the self-paced training, checklists, and a variety of other tools to help our department employees succeed. ISD will also be employing or designating employees to help with troubleshooting any of the document accessibility issues that may come up as departments are preparing to post things online. The last goal for ISD is related to our graphic information systems, or GIS staff. The GIS is typically a web or mapping, a web-based mapping kind of program, and we use a lot of GIS services to track and account for assets within the city of Fresno. So one of the goals here for fiscal year 23 is to have training for our GIS staff on accessibility, and that'll be provided by our web accessibility coordinator every 2 years thereafter as well. Slide 19, now we're going to talk about parks, after school, recreation, and community service. And you'll see the acronym actually spells out PARKS. So Parks is working on developing and publishing a program list by location that'll show the accessibility features at each facility. So it's kind of a two-parter. We want to be able to show where are the city programs and how accessible are the facilities where they are located. And this is a goal to be completed by fiscal year 22 and published online, and then updated annually. As I mentioned before, we are actively working on our ADA facilities transition plan, which means that we are systematically improving our facilities year by year in terms of accessibility. So we want to make sure that as those facilities are updated and improved, that information is also made available to members of the public. And this is very powerful. Imagine as a person with a disability, you want to coordinate and plan an outing at a park. You want to be able to know what features you can expect for accessibilities. So that's, again, fiscal year 22 goal. The next goal is related to those vendors who sometimes provide services on behalf of the city or rent out and operate within our city facilities. So we want to provide a letter on an annual basis, as well as in new or renewed contracts, informing those individuals of obligations under the ADA to provide modifications and accommodations to members of the public with disabilities. Many times our partners are running programs on our behalf and just don't know because they don't have the same opportunity to go through training as our staff do. And so we believe that this is an important goal for fiscal year 22 and ongoing annually thereafter. Pictured on the screen here, I just love this photo. This is a local wheelchair basketball team called the Central Valley Ballers. They play out of our parks facilities, and it's really a great athletic program. Slide 20, continuing with parks. Parks has a therapeutic recreation program that's recreation specifically for people with disabilities. And it's been a very powerful program since the Inspiration Park, our universally accessible park, was launched. And it's housed there at Inspiration Park. But one of the things that Parks wants to do is to expand that therapeutic recreation program to include programming at alternate locations as well throughout the city. We know that we want to have better geographic disbursement of those therapeutic recreation programs. So the goal is, starting in fiscal year 23 and ongoing thereafter, to continue to try to expand that therapeutic recreation program to other locations. Parks also is making a commitment to do some more internal tracking of any access issues or modification requests that they may get from members of the public, as they host a lot of public programs and believe that they can tighten up how they track the requests that come in so that they can better meet the needs of the public and anticipate future needs. And the last thing you'll see on here as the goals is a nod to our facilities transition plan. Every single year, there are barriers at existing parks facilities that are being removed. We're actively working on improving access in facilities. So I encourage you to also check out our facilities transition plan if you want to know what's coming up, or if you want to provide some information about what you think should be priority. And pictured here on the screen is one of our therapeutic recreation programs. It was a cheer camp several years ago, and I just love looking at those kinds of pictures. Slide 21, we'll go to Personnel Services Department. And I know those of you looking at the screen may say, oh my goodness, that text is so small. I have a reason. We'll get to it. So the first goal for Personnel Services Department is to test and implement an accessible online employment program for applicants, employees, and financial management services. This is partially underway, but we haven't launched it for members of the public. The existing program that we use is not as accessible as we'd like it to be. And so the goal is, by the end of fiscal year 22, this new online employment program will be up and running and usable for all members of the public. So this leads into this next goal, which most of our goals in this presentation I have condensed and summarized, but this one I left in because I think it's really important when we think of employment of people with disabilities. And personnel is making a commitment to review their current recruitment outreach efforts to make sure that there really is a robust list of disability organization as part of their standard outreach to receive these job bulletins. The recruitment staff wants to take time to review that list and add in additional agencies and organizations and additional contacts as possible, because they believe that it is essential to recruiting and attracting applicants with disabilities. So this is a big goal. And what we're saying here is we want to hire more people with disabilities at the City of Fresno. So some of the organizations that they may include are college and university disability services, local independent living centers, rehabilitation organizations, disabled veterans organizations, adaptive recreation programs, parent organizations, special ed departments, and so on and so forth. Annually thereafter, personnel is also committed to reviewing this list and the outreach list with our Disability Advisory Commission to make sure there aren't others that we need to be adding in, and so they can provide input on how we're doing this recruitment outreach. So that's a goal for fiscal year 22 and annually thereafter. Personnel Services Department is also going to be training employees on the use of an Ubiduo wireless communication device. And this is something that multiple of our departments are actually have acquired this device and are working, will be trained on this as well. And what it is a two-way typing communication device that can help with incidental type communication. That goal is for fiscal year 22. All right, we're coming to the home stretch. Let's talk about Planning and Development Department. Planning and Development Department includes our Building and Safety Division, our long range planning, our current planning, as well as housing and community development. So one of the first goals here for planning and development is to budget for ASL interpreting at community outreach meetings. So many times our planning efforts of our housing and long-range planning division require community outreach, and we want to make sure that that outreach is equitable and readily available for members of the public. So there's a commitment to budgeting for communication access starting in fiscal year 22 and ongoing thereafter. Planning and Development Department also has a commitment to training staff as certified access specialists starting this year, fiscal year 22 and ongoing, as well as contracting with CASPs for plan review and inspections as needed. Slide 23, continuing on with Planning and Development Department. These next two goals are kind of intertwined, and I'll talk about them together. So Article 22 of Chapter 12 of the Municipal Code allows for limited at-risk permits, which means that somebody can start to construct in advance of a full plan review. And so both of these goals look at reviewing and amending that Article 22 to see about first, do we want to continue this practice for city projects or projects that are on city property? And the second part is looking at it holistically. Is this an article of the municipal code that best serves the needs of people with disabilities in the community? And so it's a review and potential amendment of that Fresno Municipal Code. And the goals there are fiscal year 23 and 27. The next goal is related to some information and outreach. Our building inspectors will be providing brochures and education materials to building owners and tenants when they conduct inspections of tenant improvements. And we want that information to be related to how to reduce their risk of access-related lawsuits and how to be more inclusive of people with disabilities in their business. That's a fiscal year 22 goal and ongoing. And lastly, again, there's a nod to our facilities transition plan as Planning and Development Department, which also includes our parking division, has city-owned parking facilities with existing barriers to access that we are working on remediating. And those, again, can be seen within the facilities transition plan. Slide 24, let's talk about the police department. So first I wanted to make a nod here. The picture is one of our crisis intervention officers with a group of adults from the ARC Fresno Madera County. This happened actually directly after a training. And the city does have training material on how to have a safe interaction. We really, in the last self-evaluation action plan, had many steps related to bridging the gaps between law enforcement and folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so there were some great outcomes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the last action plan, but I did want to make note that there are some neat outcomes from that action plan and those action steps related to law enforcement and individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So let's talk about our new set of action steps. A lot of these are related to communication access, and the police department does have policies and procedures related to providing sign language interpreting services, but we acknowledge that there are some needs to update those procedures and provide education of staff on the policies and the procedures for providing sign language interpreters. And the goal for that is fiscal year 22. Next, the department is going to be looking into the use of video remote interpreting as an alternative to live sign language interpreters. Now, as part of the ADA requirements, there is some technology infrastructure that has to be updated. And so that's why you'll see this is an FY24 goal, because we really have to look carefully at how to make sure that we have the necessary technology to make video remote interpreting an effective option. So, for example, if there's not a committed high-speed internet connection, then video remote interpreting may not be effective because of choppy, grainy, disconnecting kind of video quality. So this is an important goal for our police department. You'll notice that the police department also has a goal related to Ubi-Duo devices, looking to potentially purchase some of those for face-to-face communications at some of our stations. And the goal for that is fiscal year 23. The next goal is related to media division, and it's an education goal, ensuring that those folks that work within the media division understand the city policies and federal requirements related to ASL interpreters for press conferences. And so that's a goal of fiscal year 22 and ongoing. Slide 25, quick nod. The picture here is former police chief and now current Mayor Dyer with a student from Etiquette Elementary, which works with individuals with a variety of disabilities. So our police department is going to be developing in-house perishable skills training. Now, that's a buzzword right there. Perishable skills training tells you that it's training that police officers have to do on an ongoing basis. So they need to repeat these trainings, those kind of skills that we know need to be brushed up on. So the department is developing in-house perishable skills training on working with individuals with disabilities and individuals with mental illness. So that training is going to include de-escalating techniques for use during crisis incidents. The goal for this objective is FY22 and ongoing every 2 years thereafter. Police Department Annex Building, as well as Police Department headquarters, are both included in our facilities transition plan for removing barriers to access. And you'll note that the goal here is anything that is involving members of the public in the Annex Building will be moved to an alternate accessible location. So that's a fiscal year 22 goal. And then the other goals related to the police facilities are included in the facilities transition plan. Slide 26, Public Utilities Department. Our Public Utilities Department also does some public outreach, and they include a goal to budget for ASL interpreters at public outreach meetings. And the goal there is fiscal year 22 and ongoing. There's a goal for improving the education program outreach materials for water conservation and water quality. So those will be reviewed and updated as needed with a target completion of fiscal year 23. Our Public Utilities Department does work with the public relations firm by contract. And so they're going to be reviewing to ensure that deliverables include videos with captions and audio description, that those contractors are understanding and meeting our digital accessibility requirements, including social media content. They'll also be exploring the feasibility of maybe some outreach marketing campaign materials in American Sign Language. And that's a goal of fiscal year 22 and ongoing. Continuing with our Public Utilities Department, we've talked a lot about our solid waste program in the past, where we have a special handling that will allow folks who are unable to take their trash bin out to the curb and back behind the enclosure to sign up for the special handling. Now, we recognize that there needs to be some updates to the Fresno Municipal Code language, as well as how we process eligibility. So the goal for that is to be updated by fiscal year 22. And you can see pictured on the screen are some community members, including those from the California Council of the Blind Fresno chapter, checking out the accessible trash can lids that include Braille, raised text, and raised symbol. Public Utilities Department is also committing to reviewing project scoping standards for capital projects to make sure that there are accessibility considerations included. And that may also include education for project managers on how to scope their projects to include accessibility. So that goal is fiscal year 23 and an ongoing basis. And related, DPU, our Public Utilities Department, would like to also have training on accessible temporary traffic control for employees that work within the right of way. So that's an important part as we're doing construction out in the public, that we are maintaining access for folks that may be navigating around a construction site. And the goal for that is fiscal year 23. We're going to talk about the Public Works Department. Public Works Department is looking to update their grant scoping and project management process to include more accessibility reviews throughout every step of the process. And looking at that for fiscal year 22. Public Works Department is also looking to develop policies to address accessible design for elements that aren't explicitly covered by the ADA standards and the California Building Code. So we're recognizing statewide that many cities are struggling with how to provide accessible on-street parking, for example. And so the city of Fresno is committed to developing policies to ensure that these type of situations have accessibility considerations and policies that will address those. So that's fiscal year 24 as a target completion for some of these policies to be developed. Public Works Department is also going to be exploring the feasibility of policies for CASP review and sign off on many of the projects that are conducted in the right of way. And again, CASP stands for Certified Access Specialist. It's a state of California credential on state and federal regulations related to accessibility. So that goal is fiscal year 24. And you'll notice that Public Works also has a commitment to CASP training for employees starting in fiscal year 22 and ongoing. Slide 29. Public Works is looking to designate staff in each division to be trained as accessibility generalists, kind of the go-to person regarding accessibility for that division. Our facilities maintenance personnel are going to be trained on requirements for new construction and alteration every 2 years. They do a lot of projects throughout all of our city facilities and believe that this is an important point for education. That goal is fiscal year 22 and ongoing every 2 years. And you'll see a nod here to our facilities transition plans. So again, take a look at some of our facilities transition plans for how we're prioritizing removal of barriers at existing facilities. We are hoping to expand and update that facilities transition plan with additional key facilities by fiscal year 26. And as mentioned before, the right-of-way transition plan is anticipated to be updated by fiscal year 25. Lastly, we're going to talk about Transportation Department. Transportation Department has been working on an independent self-evaluation and transition plan related to the bus stops. We call it the FACTS Bus Stop Transition Plan. That is on track for approval by City Council for implementation this year. So again, a nod to that transition plan for how we're going to remove barriers to access at bus stops over the next several years. Transportation is also committed to certified access specialist training for their capital development staff, and as needed, working with the CASP contractor for plan review and inspection. Transportation Department is working on an accessible mobile ticketing system. And so they're hoping to coordinate and implement that by fiscal year 23. Slide 31, we're going to continue with the Transportation Department. Currently, paratransit passes are only available on a calendar month. So Transportation Department is looking to implement smart cards, which will allow for a 30-day pass for paratransit that's comparable with those that are available for fixed route. So there's an important element, anything that we do for fixed route, we want to do equally with paratransit transportation services. And the goal for the smart card implementation is completed by fiscal year 23. Our Transportation Department is transitioning to electric bus fleet in order to meet state regulations. And this is a very exciting step forward, and we'll be seeing those buses going onto the road shortly. But one of the barriers that we are recognizing is that electric buses are quiet, and that might not provide auditory access for individuals who are blind or visually impaired. So the department is actively investigating how to implement measures to address this concern. So we see that this is an FY22 goal because those electric bus fleets will be going out on the road soon. And we want to have this barrier removed before that happens. Transportation Department has developed standards, updated standards for typical bus stops. And what they want to also do is develop additional standards for some atypical bus stops, ensuring that as we upgrade, as we address the barriers to access, that we have standards that are meeting the minimum requirements of the state and federal accessibility guidelines. So those standard drawings have already been developed, and we're looking for some atypical standard drawings to be completed by fiscal year 23. All right, lastly, the Transportation Department is working on installing a new system to provide visual and audio notifications that buses are arriving. This is very exciting. Currently, they're beta testing visual signs only at some of our key transportation hubs and trying to figure out if this is a system that's going to work with our community. And so right now they're in the beta testing and are looking towards installing this across the bus system, and as well as investigating the addition of audio notifications for folks who are blind or visually impaired. And so the goal for this is completion by fiscal year 24. So that wraps up an overview of every department's steps that they are committing to take over the next 5 years to improve access to programs, services, and activities across the city of Fresno. So now we're going to open it up if members of the public would like to provide comments or ask any questions about the ADA action plan. Those of you who wish to provide a comment, you can make your comment in the chat or in the Q&A. You can raise your hand in the attendees window to be called upon to speak. If you're calling in on the phone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand on the phone. Are there any members of the public that wish to address us on the ADA action plan? And we'll give it just another beat. Okay, at this time, we're not seeing any comments coming through on the Zoom. However, oh, I do see one hand just raised. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call on you. Jonas Palos, you do have the floor and you have permission to speak.
Can you guys hear me? I'm at the VA with a mask. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I just want to tell you, thank you. Your office did a great job. It was easy reading. Thank you for advocating for all our disabled community in the city of Fresno. I just want to extend my gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Palos. We really appreciate your partnership.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public that wish to address us regarding the ADA action plan? You can ask questions, provide comments, look for clarification. And again, if you're feeling shy and you don't want to do that in this open public forum, you are more than welcome to can fill out our survey online, which can be found at fresno.gov/ADA plan. You can email me directly at shannon.mulhall@fresno.gov, or you can call me at 559-621-8716. Real quickly before we wrap up our next steps, we're going to update our plan with any feedback we receive during this public comment period. And of course, the public comment period does remain open throughout the rest of this month. And then we'll present that updated plan to council for adoption. And then our departments will be off and running and implementing all of these action steps. Slide 34. Again, here's an overview of where to find the ADA Self-Evaluation Action Plan, which is at www.fresno.gov/ADA plan. There is an input survey, which you can also find at our fresno.gov website, and my contact information up on the screen, which I just rattled off for you, so I won't do that again. I want to say thank you to our community members who have provided tireless advocacy and has really brought to fruition this plan, as well as our ADA liaisons and department champions who work to ensure that accessibility is met in all of our programs, services, and activities. We couldn't do it without each and every one of you really taking on that charge. So thank you for your time and effort, and we will call this meeting to a close. Thank you.